So my name's Jim DeNova, and I administer the Education Grants Program for the Benedum Foundation. I also serve as a member of the West Virginia Public Education Collaborative, and Donna asked me to say a few words to set the stage for the next panel, the education panel. And I just have two brief comments to make to sort of set the stage for the real thinkers and doers who are going to speak to you in a minute. The first is the desperate need to raise the educational level of the workforce in West Virginia. I can't thank Jim Eastep enough for echoing that clarion call to raise the educational level of the workforce, because we're missing the jobs that are abundant if we have the right workforce. Now, we also heard that degrees are not as relevant as skills, and I would posture the position that it's not either or, it must be both, because skills are the basis of employability, which is why we have competency-based education. But degrees are the passport to future career advancement. So I applaud West Virginia's CLIMB initiative, which is to reach a point where 60% of the workforce will have an associate degree or higher by 2030. Stay the course. Thank you. So here's my second point about the framework for this next discussion. And that is that educational planners face a huge conundrum. And it goes like this. We've heard from the panelists and our own reading that the accelerated advances in machine learning, artificial intelligence, big data analytics, robotics is rapidly changing the skills required for the workforce. And in many ways, you've heard there's unknown, ambiguity, uncertainty. We don't know. We don't know what the jobs look like, or we're not sure. And it's really a leap into the future of work. At the same time, there's tremendous pressure on public education system to say, you must prepare students for the jobs of tomorrow. We don't know what they are, but you must prepare. So preparing for the unknown is one of those challenges I think we face. And this panel, I mean, it's a constant struggle, but this panel is going to talk about some of the efforts that really are addressing that particular conundrum. And there's just one line I'd like to leave with, and it was from Mark Camlett from CMU, who presented at previous summits and said, look, the education system needs to work on those tasks that only humans can perform. So there is going to be an accelerated race of a lot of jobs that are being performed by humans now that won't be in the future. Think about those that only humans can perform. And that should be the bedrock of education. So with that, I'm going to turn the panel over to Scott Beard, Provost from Shepherd University, member of the Public Education Collaborative, and a really cool guy.
Thank you so much, Jim. So I am humanizing and starting my big data cell phone timer so that we have that ready to go. So I am of the Tina Turner philosophy in that we are going to keep this rolling, and we are going to start right in with everything. So we had a great time with some pre-conference planning, conference calls, going over the panel, the data points that we're going to cover, and in fact, Rebecca, Al, and I just had a mini conference, and we decided that what this meeting needs is a theme song. So, you know, we started with, hey, big data. Well, that was a little too Broadway, a little too showbiz. Al suggested we needed to do the Grand Old Duke of York, if you guys know that. So if you know it, come on and stand up, everybody. Everybody up. You've been sitting a long time. And I think it goes like, we use big data now. We're trying to find out how. Well, I think now this those of you that can, we did find out that this collaboration between all of these end users and stakeholders, we have found that, how many of you saw the movie The Greatest Showman? Raise your hand. Never enough. So it's never enough what we're going to be able to do. You've all done very well. Our data analytics proves you're all mobile. Thank you. if you could have a seat. So to give you an overview of the, we've got to do something. It's 3 o'clock. To give you an overview, we're going to look at how big data is used in these various organizations, and we're going to get down a little bit into the weeds about what are the outcomes, what are the ethical issues that are involved in all of this data that is collected on our students in the P through 12 system, these folks that are under 18. How do we get students to really own that data? And then finally, what can we do as policymakers? How can we work with our legislature? Because honestly, outside of our institutional or organizational policies, our government policies are really very far behind when it comes to artificial data, artificial intelligence, and big data. So we're going to start out with Dr. Paine from the Department of Education and our Superintendent of Schools. So can you talk about, Steve, what you are doing in terms of big data to drive change, and really how this is used to create a more personalized learning environment, something that happens very well in the P through 12 system, but I think that we struggle with a bit in higher ed. We had to push the button.
Hold on. It's big data. Good afternoon. I'm Steve Paine. I'm back for my second stint. As President Gee says, welcome to the club, Mr. Superintendent. I said, what club's that? And he said, if you screw it up the first time, they have you come back and fix it a second time. I'm sure Gail and Lloyd would agree with me, right? Okay. Thank you very much. You know, one of the stresses on our system right now is what are the outcomes of the system. In our introduction, Jim said it best. I mean, what are the jobs? Where are they? What skills do they require? So we've been spending some time with Brad Smith recently from that little company called Intuit, and he's created a great program at Marshall that we have 6 pilots where we're doing entrepreneurship to feed into his iSchool within the business school there. And one of the things that he said was there was a guy that was his mentor who also mentored Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg and Bezos and others all at the same time. And those particular high-flying CEOs and others, chief operational officers and so forth, said to Brad, well, you know, we're from Harvard and Stanford and so forth, and you're from Marshall. And Brad said, what's your point? And he said, well, you know, how do you feel about that? And he said, well, I'll just tell you like it is. I got a good quality education. I had great teachers. They changed my life in public school and at Marshall University. And I paid a hell of a lot less for my education than you did. And secondly, we got a hell of a lot better football team than you've got. And he went on to talk about the quality of education that he received in Wayne County in West Virginia and the quality of his teachers at Marshall University. And he went on to talk about the 4 C's: critical thinking, creativity, communications, collaboration. And the fact that he would hire at Intuit those kids or prospective employees that had those 4 C's in addition to high-tech skills. And he also said no longer is a terminal degree a 2- and a 4-year degree. Forgive me if you're from higher ed, but it's absolutely the truth. We just want skills, and we want people that know how to get along with other people, those 4 C's, those soft skills, so to speak. Recently, I read that, I think it's Google, that inspired a Coursera course. And the Coursera course was about a credential for IT online. And it wasn't a 2-year program or a 4-year program. It was a credential. And 75,000 applicants for that course because Google inspired that particular course. That tells you a little bit about what's out there. So what's our target in public education? Is it NAEP scores? Is it standardized test scores? I don't know. I think that's important, and we hear from our employers that within West Virginia and elsewhere within the region of the country, that it's very important for us to have kids that have the right academic skills, but then they proceed to say, all that we really need for mathematics, for example, the competency levels of skills, is an understanding of Algebra 1, algebraic expressions, that kind of thing. Now, that's an interesting discussion because right now we require much higher than that for graduation. So it's a real balancing act. Let me share just a couple examples of what we're doing with artificial intelligence. So when I retired the first time, Gail, in 2011, and I got to say, we went down to McDowell County the other day. That was really, really inspirational, and I thank you for your efforts. For those of you that don't know, Gail and Randy Weingarten have inspired something really, really special in McDowell County, and I'm so glad I went down there. They're building a village, what's it called, Renaissance Village, for teachers for housing in the middle of McDowell County, right in the middle of town, and you can already see there are paved roads, the town looks good, the business fronts look rejuvenated. Please give her a nice round of applause for that. That was inspirational. My heart was touched, and I left there with a great sense of hope. But anyway, back on track. When I left the first time, I went to a company called McGraw-Hill, and I worked in education, one of the innovation divisions. And one of my first tasks was to work on a project where we created, very much like you show up at an airport, you go look for your flight on the screen. We work with kids, individualized learning, adaptive learning. You master content in the content areas of English language arts, science, mathematics, and so forth. And the daily activities would be scored that night, and then you show up and look for your screen and your name on the screen the next morning, and it would prescribe your program of studies for the next day. Great idea, great concept, too expensive, not enough content, fell by the wayside, it's done. So that was one example. Next example, we have an early warning system. We actually have, there are numerous early warning systems out there today. Helped create one. There are 20 data points from academics to behavior to attendance and other factors, demographic variables, that kind of thing, that can be all loaded into an algorithm and do predictive modeling to look at what are the chances of a child dropping out of school. In the first grade, we had it down to 92% predictability. We could detect the kids that were going to drop out of school. Middle school is about 94%, high school about 98%. But that's well and good, and that can be impressive, but what happens next? And so there was an insights layer that would actually have research-based strategies paired to the profile of the individual student. But what we learned was it doesn't matter. You have kids read those online strategies, or parents read those online strategies. You take the human element out of this whole thing, we all know what is the number one strategy for improving student engagement at schools? It's an adult mentor that works with kids. You cannot remove the human factor out of this. So even though we have an identification system, which is important, what's more important is that we work with our teachers and our adults within the system right now. And teachers will tell you very clearly, look, just let me teach. I don't want to counsel kids. I want to teach. Our challenge is to work with higher ed, and I think Sarah Tucker is doing a fabulous job, and I want to applaud the Summers, your support for putting the 2- and the 4-year systems together, because I think it is absolutely ideal for alignment. And Sarah and I have already had our senior staff members that have gotten together to try to figure out those pathways so that we can work with Mr. Grandy, who I just saw downstairs, and economic development down the road. It's a great model right now. It's really, really working. Get along really well with Sarah. So anyway, that's another example, early warning systems. We also have, with a company that we work with, what are called lexiles and quantiles. You can actually take a state standardized test and then benchmark assessments, which are given every quarter to measure cumulative progress for each individual student. And you can assign lexile and quantile scores to those assessment results. Then you can take those and actually put them into what's called a growth planner. And there's a band trajectory from kindergarten through, actually, wears out your finger after a while, doesn't it? It does. Yeah. You can take a band, a K-12 band of progress, and you can take the students' numerical score at any grade level and pop it into that band, and it's predictive based on what's required for college career readiness. But most importantly, we have 400 occupations that kids can measure their current level of performance against in that particular trajectory. I'm trying to figure out a better way to do this.
I think we got it. You know, and that's a really there we go. That's a really great point about as we've been talking about moving what I call moving students from courses to careers, those predictive analytics, and then also kind of the heart factor of those that have a desire to do these things and to be able to persevere. And we are bypassing the technology up here.
Scott, could I tell them about one last?
Yeah, let's get one more, and then I want to move to Boy Scouts for a second.
I get that. This is called Alt School, and it's a startup in San Francisco. And I'm going to read from what I read. Imagine classrooms outfitted with cameras that run constantly, capturing each child's every facial expression, fidget, and social interaction every day, all year long. Then imagine on the ceilings of those rooms infrared cameras documenting the objects that every student touches throughout the day, and microphones recording every word that each person utters. Picture now the children themselves wearing Fitbit-like devices that track everything from their heart rates to their time between meals. And for a quarter of a day, students use Chromebooks and learning software track their every click and keystroke. And this is Alt School, a startup. So then you're trying to make deductions from all of that data and all those data points about what learning strategies and instructors, if you will, are best for those individual students. And then I started thinking, how would that work in West Virginia? We are light years away from that for several reasons. One is that, you know, AI is not perfect. There are mistakes made. You can't remove the human factor. Something to strive for, but that's probably where AI, big data, probably will end up in 10 years.
And that is a great transition, because to a couple of lucky folks in the audience, you don't get to keep these, but I want to share these with you. So, Al, if you could talk a little bit about the data analytics points that you use for the Jamboree, tens of thousands of scouts wearing these devices, and literally millions of data points in terms of how folks are moving from event to event and social connections.
So we get into the practical rubber meets the road side of how to use this technology, and thank you for that. We just for a little background, you heard the general and others, and Gail mentioned that we held the Jamboree this summer. Jamborees are an original program in the Boy Scouts of America. They started in 1912 overseas. We've held them ever since 1932 or so in the United States. We hold them every 4 years, and the state of West Virginia will be our permanent home for Boy Scouts of America Jamborees. Why is it significant? There are 51 million scouts in the world. In 170 countries, 145 countries visited the Jamboree. And we made a decision in planning this World Jamboree that technology would be a big part of it. We made that jump in 2010 with the Boy Scouts of America. The story we love to tell is in 2010 at our Jamboree in Fort A.P. Hill, we told the Scoutmasters to have the Scouts leave the cell phones home. In 2013, when we moved to West Virginia and instilled our technology, we left those Scoutmasters home. Everything we do now is got a technology base. We still teach map and compass, and then we teach GPS. And that leads us to a discussion about those little devices that are going on. That's called a Novus. That Novus device was given to every one of the 41,832 participants that attended the World Jamboree. And it became their interface to a technology platform that connected them to an app, to social media, to live streams, to all sorts of stuff. It provided a whole pile of data. The 41,000 participants made 4.7 million connections with that little device. If you press on it as it's coming around, it'll blink at you. those devices were used at an event. We completely gave out all of the World Jamboree ones. You can see they're branded. They wore them the whole time. They used them in the shows. We could light them up at night, and the whole audience would light up. But more importantly, they provided some very interesting data for us. They provided wait times at events. Now, you would think that that's a very important thing. You know, if a kid hikes 2 miles across the summit site to go skateboarding or mountain biking, he doesn't want to get there and find a 2-hour line. I should say he or she. Our World Jamboree was 46% female. Pretty good stuff. So they were able to connect with the app and find out what the wait times were for each of the program venues. There are about 25 different program venues. They allowed us to track a number of different interactions. If there was a problem, and that's a big thing on our end, if there was a problem, a kid had a problem, we were able to locate where he was or she was due to the location. They checked in and checked out with events, and they checked with each other. One of the primary missions when our founder, Robert Baden-Powell, started scouting in the early 1900s was to create social connections with kids around the world. That's what he hoped in the early 1900s would happen. And you saw that happen in West Virginia here. Kids from all around the world would approach each other with this device, connect with each other, and then begin a relationship and an electronic dialogue that we're monitoring today. We track today as they went back home, as they traveled back home and did many other things. So the Novus device was really our first interaction into big data. One of the questions they ask is, what are we going to do with this data? And we talked about the responsible use of it. We have kept it all internally at this point. We're kind of sorting through it. We're using it for things like flow of kids in large events through program events. We're searching for ways to make sure that we can connect with the appropriate health information. And then we're looking into how we can reinforce learning objectives in our program. The outdoors is our classroom for character, and it's where we teach. And we want to make those connections, try to make connections to learning objectives. In other words, we can tell where they are. We can send a note to their app and say, you know, there's no line over at the conservation area. And we noted in your profile that you have an interest in the STEM program. We want to get you over into this area. You can go there now. So we're looking at ways to use programs like this for enhancing the experience that our scouts have when they come in the outdoors.
Great. Thanks so much, Al. So I don't know about you. As I listen to all of this information about gathering data, can anybody think of 2 words that come to mind? The first word is big, and it's not data. What's the second word? Brother. Right? So in looking at this, the responsibility of how we utilize that data, how we permit the access to that. So Illah, as you have worked with students in your programs at Carnegie Mellon with the ethics and the case studies, could you talk a little bit about that and the use of artificial intelligence and the boundaries? And then from there, I want to move to Dr. Wolfe here to talk about the data privacy and how students can really take ownership of that data. And it calls into question some things for us because those students are minors. They're under 18. And how does that interface with their guardians or their parents? So, Illah?
Thank you, Scott. You mentioned Big Brother. Actually, one of the only books I don't have my students read is 1984. We read just about everything else that's out there. This all started because over the last 25 years of teaching classes on AI, robotics, and ethics, I've noticed a gradual shift in the students. Number of our students would come in 18, 15, 12 years ago and be really excited about the idea of using computer science to get really, really wealthy. Start a company, get some stock options, grow it, and then one day buy a large boat and a castle somewhere. And I've seen a sea change.
I'm on board for that.
Okay, so you're about 12 years late. But the pendulum swings again, so in about 45 years you might have another shot. And what happened is in the last 12 years or so, I've seen a sea change where the students more and more are asking questions fundamental to their identity. They're asking questions like, what does AI do to who I am as a human? What do I do in a company that furthers the company's cause but gives me something to be proud of in my life? And how do I help my community out? My community being wherever they came from, whether rural India or central Pennsylvania or West Virginia. And so more and more I'm seeing a connection students are seeing to the local, to the personal, and to the sense of personal identity. And so starting about 4 years ago, we began to inject a new kind of AI fluency in our youngest students, and that's the freshmen. And so we have an experimental class called the Grand Challenge class that we teach half to computer science freshmen and half to humanities freshmen. It's called AI in Humanity. And the fundamental idea was, if we can catch the students in their first semester at Carnegie Mellon, we have an opportunity to show them enough historical context and enough grammar for how to think and talk about power negotiations, about surveillance, about the positive and negative ramifications of the ownership of information by corporations, by government, and by personal citizenry, that they can start to understand the boundaries along which our humanity and our culture will change in the next 20 to 30 years. And if you do that well, if you can give them a sense of that in a fluent way where they can talk that language, they can actually speak that, and they can critique what they see, because as you well know on the internet, there's a lot of hyperbole around big data, along with a lot of very true stories. And if they can separate the wheat from the chaff, if they can understand the future better, then maybe they can give themselves a kind of wayfinding. And by wayfinding, what I mean is an ability to understand over the next 4 years of their education at Carnegie Mellon, what are the set of classes I want to take that prepare me to be the best possible player in that future, to have the skills and talents, as Jim mentioned, but then to understand the ways in which socially and ethically I know what impact I can have on society as a person, and how I decide that I, as an adult, need to formulate my own sense of responsibility to society. It's worked out really well. We have them read, believe it or not, Gerald Siegel on the Sense of Self. They read the entire narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. They watch a whole ton of Black Mirror episodes, Star Trek episodes. They learn concept diagramming, and they learn to concept diagram power negotiations in society. And we even have a class where we do this with surveillance and technology and privacy around the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Because the way data was accumulated in Belfast and the way it was used by state sponsors for and against advocates of citizen freedom are very powerful exemplars that are early in the early 70s and early 80s against a lot of what we're seeing now in a lot of countries around the world. So fundamentally what we've decided is we have to stop divorcing technology skilling from the art of understanding from a humanities point of view the ramifications technology has on society writ large, and the grammar with which our students can understand it today and tomorrow for their near future so they can decide on what classes to take. And I think if we can do that and create students who are actually humanities students, who are ethically conscious, and who have the ability at any dinner party to blow everybody away by their understanding of technology and the actual boundaries of what AI can do, and at the same time humanity, and the ways in which society has been changed historically and in the near future by technology, we've created a new kind of student. And it's ironically the kind of student Aristotle and Solon's were all about. But we lost out on that because we got kind of blinded by the light of technology and stock markets. So that's what we're doing.
Great. And, you know, I think that point about what are the essential learning outcomes for students, if we look at a liberal arts education, our core curriculum, general studies in higher ed, we're really stressing the verbal, oral, the written communication, collaborative work, critical thinking, knowledge of the world. So these are things that we've heard over and over today in our panels about the essential, or what I would call intended student learning outcomes on a broader level for higher education. So Rebecca, in your career, as you have worked to bring high quality learning experiences to all students, what do you see as some of the issues that we need to think about as we move forward in our use of big data?
So it's hard going at the end of a long day because my head is just exploding with all of the different places I'm hoping to go in this conversation. So just briefly, because Scott made the mistake of letting me turn on the microphone. So just just a word on what KnowledgeWorks does. So we are a national organization. Some of you may be looking at me with sort of a sliding door feeling, because the last time I had the privilege of being in West Virginia, I was with an organization called Jobs for the Future. I have now been at KnowledgeWorks for 6 months, and I was able to bring my toys with me. So the work that we had been doing, building up a knowledge base around how learners are motivated, where they need to go, and how we get research in the hands of the policymakers and the practitioners that are trying to change schools to really match learning, that has come with me to KnowledgeWorks. At KnowledgeWorks, we are really focused on personalized learning. And the reason that we're focused on personalized learning is because for over 10 years, every 3 years, we put out something called a future forecast. So we have real live futurists on staff, people with actual degrees in futurism. So for those of you who said we can't predict the future, I can turn to my colleague, Catherine, and apparently she can. So what we do at KnowledgeWorks is every 3 years, we look at major social trends, we look at geographic trends, we look at macroeconomic trends, we look at what learning looks like and how it's changing, and then we look at what does that mean for the individual student and for educators. So we are always trying to bring, much as I'm trying to do in my head right now, the massive conversation we started with this morning, back to an individual student. And in particular at KnowledgeWorks, we are looking at the students who have been least well served by our systems, who have been most marginalized, students who are Black and brown, students who are English language learners, students who have learning differences, and students who are low income. So what does the future hold for those students? And so it's been interesting for me to listen throughout this day to so many of these great big thinkers saying, we are just desperate for workers. And it's not until the end of the day that we've started saying, well, then why are we forcing students to sit in schools that look like my grandparents' schools? So if we want to be producing workers of the future, we need to be thinking about the thinkers of the future, and in particular, our most marginalized students. So for us, questions of data privacy are really critical, but more importantly are those themes that you've started hearing already in this panel. How do we equip our students to be critical thinkers? How do we make sure that they are able to be collaborative learners? How do we make sure they can communicate about what they're learning? Illah has done this in his coursework at a college level. We are trying to do it at a state level, at a district level, at a school level, through really thinking differently about how we use time in school, how we use pacing, how we use the understanding of the learner. And so for us, the question and the conversation needs to be not about how do we protect our students, but how do we equip them, each and every one of them, to make sense of this bombardment of data that's coming at them every day.
So do you think, panel, that we're sending the right message to students and parents, or are we doing things to help them understand that we are making these data-driven decisions based on data that we're collecting about their child? Steve, do you want to start us off down there?
Can you repeat your question?
Sure. I think there were a couple in there, but basically, in terms of, you know, and you could speak to any of these points about the student ownership of the data and how they're taking the responsibility for perhaps those choices as they're getting older. You could think career trajectories. But additionally, are we sending the right message to parents and students about the data that we're collecting, and how we're using it and how they can be involved in that process?
I don't think we're giving parents the right message about the occupations that are out there today and the prerequisite skills that are required to fill those occupations. And it's on me, it's on our system, it's on our counties, our educators and so forth. We need to do a better job of making sure that parents understand where the jobs are, what kinds of credentials are prerequisite to those jobs, and how they can get their kids within that track to secure those jobs. We have to do a much better job.
And I would say, as we've heard today about the connection with alumni associations, higher ed, we need to do a better job with that too, because, hey, it's okay to be an English major because you could be working for any of the companies that we heard from today in writing reports and helping them get their messaging out. You could be a marketing major. You don't have to be in big data. There are all these opportunities with those companies. Illah?
I'm going to tar Pittsburgh a little bit because I can. I'm on a school board there, so I can say that we're doing a horrible job, because it starts with understanding how we treat data, and it starts with being transparent about the use of the data. And even at the school board level, we fail to understand how our own data agglomerators use data. That is to say, my school uses Google Docs. And the agreements we sign with Google Docs is such that Google can do just about anything they want with everything that our students in the entire school, K through 12, write. Literally.
So not secure. By the way, we've moved away from that at my institution.
And I'm not even talking about security. I'm talking about the fact that Google can exploit and monetize anything my students write for any purpose, even if it were encrypted and secure. And so what's interesting is we don't even start to communicate around the fluency of understanding data ownership and data rights to our own parents, much less to their children who are going to grow up in an age where they have to understand data rights and data privilege. So really, at the school level, it's a learning moment. It's a learning moment at which school could be an engagement platform for reaching out to parents and to students and helping them to understand and navigate data issues which actually are going to pervade all the decisions they make throughout life.
Just to build on that, I'm sorry, were you going to go? So one thing that when we did our preparation call, we were told very clearly that what we don't need to do is suggest new policy for West Virginia. So I would not suggest something like California Bill 375, in which they laid out a very clear, and it was a conversation where it was a real compromise between the tech giants and the data rights advocates, where they really landed on 3 core questions in order to own data. So all Californians are now asked, or now have the legal right to ask, what do you store on me, why, and with whom? So that is not a good idea for West Virginia, because that would be a bill. However, something else that we have seen, similar to what Illah was describing in his community, is what they consider a student's data bill of rights. And that is where it is not necessarily, but could be a legal document, but it is far more importantly, it's a community conversation. It's a community structure in which a locality, a district, a region, or a state is coming together and saying, what do we want to protect? What do we want to own? What do we want to be transparent about? And it's laying it out in a way that it is reinforceable to some degree. So as Illah is saying in Pittsburgh, it's a way of having that conversation about, is it okay that everybody uses Google and Google now owns everything just because my child's 3rd grade teacher says that's what they do. So Students' Bill of Rights around data is another tool that communities can use.
So we've incorporated the data discussion into our safety discussions. And parents, we're finding parents today want to have that safety conversation right straight up. Whether the program is safe from a programmatic standpoint, we're going to go whitewater rafting in the New River or use a big zip. There's a lot of program elements that we do that their parents haven't even done. So the safety issues there, the youth protection issues from societal issues like child abuse. And we're incorporating data protection now into that dialogue to have the discussion with parents and with the students about protection of data. So it's a different entry point into the discussion. We're new to the whole discussion about big data, and we realize we have tons of it to deal with and a big responsibility to take care and make it safe.
So panel, as you look at some of the innovative practices that you've been telling all of us about, what do you think has made the biggest impact in or on your organization? So whoever wants to go first. I'm looking at Steve. Go ahead. Go for it.
biggest impact in my organization, I'm in a place called the Create Lab, which is an organization of about 30 researchers at Carnegie Mellon University across departments. And the biggest impact, I think, that we've had comes from the intersection of big data with visualization that's interactive, visualization of hundreds of layers of information in a way that you can create strong, rhetorically compelling narrative out of the data. And it's interesting because I've seen this have impact on grant makers in Pittsburgh and how they choose to give money. I've seen it have impact on, quite literally, JP Morgan Chase's investment strategy, because they can identify supply chains that demonstrate modern slavery and then avoid investment in those supply chains. I've seen it impact Standard & Poor's Global because they can use it to show the GDP loss around the world due to women being treated unequally as men. Then they can go after those countries with lower standards from S&P. And it's really powerful because in each case it's policy making at any kind of fractal level, but the policy making becomes informed by data in a highly interactive and interrogatory way, where these are people who have content expertise. They now have access to hundreds of layers of data they couldn't make sense of before without a computer. And it's that interesting fluid collaboration between the computer, their eyeballs, and their thought processes that together, that triad, lets them come up with new theories for how the world is working and how the world's changing, and then come up with policies that make the world a better place. And I've seen that everywhere: World Wildlife Federation, United Nations, High Commissioner for Refugees, etc. So I think there's a strong future there in the area of visualization that's interactive, leaning on the expertise of people combined with the expertise of AI systems at the same time.
We have a lot of data, probably more than we really need. So I think we do a good job in our system of keeping kids in school, graduating kids. We have a pretty decent graduation rate. And for those that want to talk about remediation rates, we've reduced those remediation rates when they go to college too, so we're trying to do that. I think it's, and I would ask all of you the question, if most of you have children or have had children or grandchildren or whatever, what's the goal? Is it a 4-year degree? And then I would ask, well, why? Because today in Maryland, in Colorado, and Texas, for example, students that have the combination that Brad Smith talked about, the 4 C's, and those real high-tech skills combined, are now out earning their 4-year graduate counterparts with their 2-year degrees. And that can actually happen in 1 year. And I go back to the example that the Google-inspired Coursera course, 75,000 folks taking that course so they can get a job, get a credential to get a job at Google. It's a whole different world and we have a major job to re-educate folks to understand that it's not just about, and it's not skills at the expense of a degree, but the sheepskin's not nearly as important as it once was.
Well, and I think the point about the credentialing, I'll give an example. I worked with a startup company at my institution where the technical officer came in not having a 4-year or a 2-year degree, but was a talented programmer and started at $75,000 and a share of the company. So, you know, I think that the idea that we have these flexible models out there, and it is about the skill and the talent, and then at some level you are going to need that additional education or experiential piece to help take you to the next level, for sure.
So our program's missions, for those of you that may not be familiar with at least the technical part of scouting, character, citizenship, leadership, and fitness. And we can't do that. The expression of what we do that is generally in the outdoors. Big data is helping us learn how to facilitate learning objectives tied to those 4 mission components directly with those program experiences. How do you connect learning how to cook over a fire with character development or citizenship or self-reliance or those kinds of things? More importantly, how do you get them through program events, and how do you connect the learning objectives to that? The other thing that data is allowing us to do is to attract kids that normally wouldn't raise their hand and say, I want to go in the outdoors. The outdoors is an intimidating place to a lot of kids growing up. We posed a question some time ago to a group of kids, just generally to say, who wants to go on a canoe trip Saturday? And a number of the kids raised their hand, said, yeah, I'll go. And then we said to the group, well, how about the next Saturday we go on a biological exposition of a river where we're going to take a look at the microbiology and the aquatics life and, on, and we're going to do that in a canoe. Boom, all the hands went up. So the data is allowing us to say these kids' interests lie in places that are in subsets of the character, citizenship, fitness, and leadership components that we believe are part of the healthy development of a child. And it's a fascinating new way for us to look at a very old program delivery model.
Well, and I love that we're having this discussion about what we maybe perceive as a really traditional organization in terms of the Boy Scouts of America. Now, here's your chance, everybody. While I enjoy having a microphone, goodness knows, we'd like to, I've tried to save a little bit of time for you guys out there to ask a question. I will come to you with a microphone, or I will continue with other questions of my own because I have millions. So if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand at this time. Oh, it's a tough crowd, I see. Oh, all the way at the back. Here we go. First of all, thank you. I don't have any cookies for you, but...
Al, I'm Mac Warner. My question to you is about the little wristband that you had. Did all Scouts get it? And if so, what was programmed in it? And was it tied to that individual, or was it just generic? If you could give me some more information on
They all got it. We ran out. It was an extremely popular program. It was pre-programmed with some basic information, basic contact information. They had to go in and fill out a profile. And for those of you in the technology world, I'm just the scout guy. I'm responsible for all of our outdoor adventures in the BSA. But for the tech people, this is where the whole thing begins. This is what I listen to. The development of the profile was what allows us to engage then through our Jamboree app, social media, and everything else. It talked about the hopes and aspirations, the things that the individual wanted to accomplish during the 12-day event. Now, remember, 12 days, 41,000 participants, 4.7 million interactions with that device. That's checking into program areas, that's checking with each other. The average wearer of that device contacted 114 other individuals during the 12 days. So our first mission for that was to create the social connections, especially across cultures, which is a huge thing. So they did have to interact with it. It was specific. It contained a minimal level of information. We hope in the future that it can become a device that can help us track any particular health problems, medical issues they may have while they're out interacting. Very interesting stuff.
Well, I think the medical applications are particularly fascinating given some of the relative isolation of our population and really the underserved population. We also know that West Virginia has a pretty poor set of health indices as well. So I'll tell you, at our campus, we just piloted as a supplement to our student health services. We have an app that students use on their phone, and so they have access 24/7 to health services, and it promotes maybe a better level of confidentiality than going into the health services person to person. But I think that, in terms of the medical rescue aspect, there's certainly lots of things that we can do. There's also the user interface to try to make those things as friendly as possible. And there's a new thing. Have you guys heard about it? Not the iPad. It's like oh gosh, I'm not going to have. It's basically like iPad for grandparents, but it's like Grandpa Pad or something like that. They're available at Target. Christmas is coming.
By the way, Scott, nobody asked yet, but $17 per device. It was a significant investment for us to do this.
but the amount of data that's coming through in there is certainly staggering. Other questions? To wrap up our panel, could you talk about what you're seeing in the future for your organization or what you would like to see happen? And I'm going to start with Rebecca. And also, there's one more device out there. If you can raise your hand, I'll come get that.
We can track you, you know.
Yes, $17 plus tax.
So I was afraid you would call on me first. So I don't want to be the wet blanket at the end of the day, but so big data is actually not a huge piece of our work. It's not a huge piece of the day-to-day of the vast majority of the millions of educators in our school systems. But it is dramatically impacting their lives in ways that they may not even realize it. So I think what I'm hopeful for the future is that these two conversations, because I do see them in many ways as two conversations. There's or three. There was sort of the morning of just, the massive amounts of data that are available and some of the ways we're harnessing it. The need for workforce to have more skilled workers who are able to work in that. And now this sense of, or the sense that I have of, that's not even the conversation or basic awareness in most of our schools. So I guess what I would love to see happen is post forums like this, those groups are actually talking to each other, because for all the stories, as Dr. Paine read, for the alt schools hoopla, that article is actually 3 years old, and that company has now basically sunset most of their attempts to use this kind of big data to understand students' learning, and they've moved in a pretty different direction. It was announced just about 2 months ago. Massive investment, didn't really work, because at the end of the day, it's that relationship the student has with the human being sitting next to them and the teacher. So again, equipping those students and those educators to function in the world that is big data is the conversations where I would love to see them coming together, because right now, again, my day-to-day world, big data is really not part of the conversation.
So you're hearing the thread coming back to communication and the development of relationship between the mentor and the student, or mentor and the person, whatever the organization would be. Al, I'm going to go to you, then Illah, and then Steve, you get to bring us home.
We're a volunteer-based organization that relies on strong role models to teach character, citizenship, leadership, and fitness. Volunteers have about 3 discretionary minutes a day. Big data has to help us make program delivery easier, more effective, and connected to our mission. And it's got to. It's the way we're going. Digital program delivery. These things that we learn through the use of big data has got us have a connection to mission and make volunteers' lives easier in program delivery.
Thank you for the connection to mission. As my own institution is moving towards more online courses and programs, that has to be done with the mission in mind and how we provide access to higher education, but done in a way that is also establishing that personal connection. So thank you for that. Illah?
I'll give you our sense of vision, both K through 12 with my school board hat as well as at Carnegie Mellon. And they're very similar. The strategies are almost identical. On the school board level, what we're trying to do is rethink the thread of education and have the thread of education in middle school and high school be fundamentally about the city in which the school is located. We call it a program, it's called City is Our Classroom, where multiple courses in the middle school and high school take you to understand serious issues vis-a-vis inequality and inequity in Pittsburgh. And then with the lens of that class, you think about the ways in which you can directly engage with the communities in Pittsburgh to try and resolve that. This means the students have become learners that are hyper-local. This gives them heart, it gives them passion and empathy, and it allows them a place in which to take their technical skills and parlay it into good for the city itself. At the university level, we're making a fairly significant push to rethink the fact that technology gives us this incredible productivity, and yet that productivity, which has the potential to raise all boats, has, by and large, in the last 10 or 15 years, resulted in some dramatic examples of inequity. And so what we're trying to do at the Carnegie Mellon level is ask the question, what does it look like to invest ethics and ethical thinking into the entire technology innovation pipeline? And if we can do that right, can we have a set of entrepreneurs and innovators come out of Carnegie Mellon that rethink the balance of values in the companies that they are born? Recently, the International Business Forum announced that maximizing shareholder value is no longer the goal of a company. And of course, it wasn't in the early 1980s or 1970s at all. This is some weird local thing that we've had a phenomenon on. They changed it from shareholder value to stakeholder value. So it's, a little bit better. But it's a step in the right direction. So the idea at Carnegie Mellon becomes, how can you take the idea of innovation, the idea of risk-taking, and weave it together with ethics and with contextual understanding of the inequities in society, so that the risk-taking is wrought as a force that will actually do good in the world socially, be pro-social.
So companies with heart, I think one of the things today that we've only scratched the surface on would be the access and the opportunity that big data can bring, and that there is inequity there. Dr. Paine?
Two thoughts. Couldn't agree with Rebecca more. We have kids that are really, really troubled today, more so than at any other time in our history. We know how to deal with that, though. And so we know that adult mentors, and that can come in the form of teachers or counselors or whomever. We just need more and more and more caring, loving adults who care about their kids and know their content. And we appreciate, I saw President Carmichael come in. I think he's back. Is that you in the back of the room? All right. And we appreciate the legislature, Amy, Delegate Waxman, your support of the $30.5 million that you gave us to distribute to the counties to provide adults and support systems for those kids. Just critically important right now, more than ever. And you have no idea how many positive comments I've heard from educators and how much they appreciate that level of support. Second would be, and I heard you say, entrepreneurship. I don't see any, and I really, if you have a chance to listen to Brad Smith, listen to him. He is inspirational and he knows his stuff. And he talks about a vision. He talks about 2 days in his life. One, Mark Twain says, the most important day is when you're born. The second most important day is when you figure out why. And he says he's figured out why. And he's committed himself to West Virginia, to creating a culture in West Virginia where he'll take something like the D School at Stanford or whatever and create that at Marshall. But most importantly, help us create some pilots where we can create entrepreneurs too, like they did in Ireland, and turn around the entire economy. And so that requires us to figure out a way to help teachers teach differently than they're teaching right now. And so we're doing that in 6 pilots, and I hope that we can learn something from those pilots in working with him so that we can scale that out to the rest of the state. No reason why our kids, the coach used to tell us all the time, you put your pants on the same way everybody else does. And so there's no reason why our kids can't be as competitive as anybody anywhere else.
So I think that that's a great note to end on, that we have the opportunity, the power of possibility through communication, through collaboration. I know at my own institution, that crucial partnership with the P through 12 system, the communities that we serve. We've got new pilots in terms of educator preparation, success coaches for students. And so all of this, we can use big data, as we've heard, as a resource, as a tool, so that we can really change the directory for our student population, but also for the economy of our state. So I want you guys to really thank this fantastic panel. It's been a pleasure to work with them. And I think we made up a couple minutes. So here you go, Donna.